What are equivalent fractions? To figure out equivalent fractions, let's start off by doing a little bit of exploring. Let's take a look at a fraction and see what we can do with it. So let's take a look at the fraction 4 over 10. Now, is there another way that we could write this fraction? Yes, there is. We could take 4 over 10 and reduce it. In order to do that, we need to take 4 over 10 and divide it by a fancy form of 1. Here, we can divide by 2 over 2. 2 over 2 reduces to 1. So really, we're just taking 4 over 10 divided by 1. When we do that, we have 4 divided by 2 in the numerator and 10 divided by 2 in the denominator. Simplifying, we get 2 over 5. So 2 over 5 is a reduced form of 4 over 10. Neat. Now let's take a closer look at this. If we take 4 over 10 divided by 2 over 2, we're taking our fraction divided by a fancy form of 1. Again, 2 over 2 reduces to 1. So really, we're just taking 4 over 10 divided by 1. When we performed this division, we got 2 over 5. So 4 over 10 divided by 1 is 2 over 5. That means that 4 over 10 is equal to 2 over 5. These two fractions are equal to one another. If we take 4 divided by 10, we get the same value we would if we took 2 divided by 5. Since these fractions are the same value, they are called equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions are fractions that have the same value. So here, our fractions are equal, they have the same value, so they're equivalent fractions. Now, in order to create an equivalent fraction, all we need to do is take our original fraction and either multiply or divide it by a fancy form of 1. Here, we took our original fraction 4 over 10 and divided it by the fancy form of 1, 2 over 2. That gave us the equivalent fraction 2 over 5. But 2 over 5 is not the only equivalent fraction to 4 over 10. So now that we know what an equivalent fraction is, let's get some practice finding equivalent fractions. Let's find some more equivalent fractions to 4 over 10. So here, instead of dividing, let's multiply. Let's take 4 over 10 and multiply it by 2 over 2. So now we're taking our original fraction and multiplying it by a fancy form of 1. That means that the resulting fraction will be an equivalent fraction. So we have 4 times 2 over 10 times 2. Well, that gives us 8 over 20. Now, 8 over 20 may look a little bit different than 4 over 10. But those fractions are equivalent fractions. They have the same value. Now, we can find another equivalent fraction to 4 over 10 by multiplying or dividing by another fancy form of 1. This time, let's multiply by 4 over 4. 4 over 4 is another fancy form of 1. So here we take our original fraction and multiply it by a fancy form of 1, and the resulting fraction will be an equivalent fraction. So that means that 16 over 40 is an equivalent fraction to 4 over 10. Great! Now, we can continue finding equivalent fractions to 4 over 10 simply by either multiplying or dividing by fancy forms of 1. And there are infinitely many fancy forms of 1. That means that each fraction has infinitely many equivalent fractions. We just need to keep picking different fancy forms of 1. Here, we end up with the equivalent fraction 40 over 100, just by multiplying by the fancy form of 1, 10 over 10. And we can even find another by taking our original fraction and multiplying by 200 over 200, another fancy form of 1. When we perform this multiplication, we get 800 over 2,000. Now this fraction looks a lot different than 4 over 10, but they are equivalent fractions. They have the same value. So here, 800 over 2,000, 40 over 100, 16 over 40, 8 over 20, 2 over 5, and 4 over 10 are all equivalent fractions. They all have the same value. So remember, equivalent fractions are fractions that have the same value. In order to find equivalent fractions, just take your original fraction and either multiply or divide it by a fancy form of 1.